Aliens tortured her without mercy, until a human risked everything to save her. HFY Sci-Fi Audiobook. The corridor was too clean, too silent. A long throat of steel that seemed to swallow every sound. The polished walls of chrome and white reflected Kael Draven's shape back at him like a ghost, his boots striking the floor with hollow echoes that felt out of place in this perfect machine. The air was lifeless, filtered until it carried no scent, no warmth, no trace of anything living. This was the Krell Corporation's domain, where even oxygen was controlled down to the last molecule. Kael kept his hands loose at his sides and his expression calm. It was the face of a man who had worked too long under alien masters, but inside his chest a tension pulled tight. He was here, for one reason, a contract that paid well enough to risk stepping into a cage built for creatures like him to vanish. A door ahead hissed open, and Director Varen stepped out. The Krell was shorter than Kael, but carried authority like pressure on the skin. He wore a gray tunic so precise it looked carved from stone. His black eyes studied Kael with cold curiosity, not the curiosity of one person meeting another, but of a scientist inspecting a tool. The human contractor, Varen rasped. Your credentials are adequate. You will maintain the biomechanical systems of Asset 7. Discretion is absolute. Failure is death. Payment is survival. Kael inclined his head, voice steady. I understand, but Varen's gaze sharpened. Do not mistake it for an invitation to care. It is not an asset in your sense. It is a weapon system, and it obeys only pain. Kael followed as the Krell turned, doors sealed behind them with thuds like tombs closing. Each step deeper felt heavier, until they reached the final chamber. When the last door slid open, a rush of colder air touched Kael's skin, faint with the metallic tang of blood and something wilder hidden beneath. The chamber was dim, lit only by pale blue emitters. Cables and conduits spread like veins across the floor, and at the center stood a vertical diagnostic wall, shackled. To it was the weapon he was sent to keep alive. Kael stopped. His practiced calm threatened to crack. He had expected a beast, a monstrous machine of flesh and metal, but what he saw instead was her, slender, almost delicate, though bound in brutal yellow armor plates bolted to a black suit that hugged her form like a cage. A curtain of deep blue hair fell over a pale face, scars traced across her skin, but it was the ears that caught his breath, fox-like, tipped with glowing orange filaments, twitching faintly as if listening to things unseen. She lifted her head slowly and her eyes opened, amber and burning, alive with hatred so fierce it felt like fire pressed against his chest. Director Varen's voice cut the silence. Asset 7, begin your diagnostic. Kael forced himself forward, his kit heavy in his hand. Every instinct told him this was not a weapon, not a machine, but someone who refused to break even after being carved and chained. He steadied his breath, knowing one thing with certainty: this job was not going to end the way the Krell expected. Kael moved carefully, the hum of his scanner breaking the silence. As he began at her feet, heavy magnetic shackles bolted her ankles to the wall. The scanner's light swept over the junction of flesh and metal, and his wrist display filled with warnings: inflammation, fractures, rejection. She was not a weapon in perfect condition. She was a battlefield barely holding together. He lifted the scanner higher, cataloging cables, ports, conduits stitched through her body like scars of a cruel engineer. He spoke aloud for the room's recorders. Diagnostic sweep initiated, power regulators stable, organic response elevated, every word steady, his mask perfect. But inside his mind his thoughts twisted with anger, because this was not maintenance. It was torment dressed as science. Director Varen stood behind the observation glass, his silhouette unmoving, his eyes black pools that missed nothing. Kael knew every movement was judged, every pause noted. He had to act with precision. He had to hide his intent under the weight of professionalism. He leaned closer, his scanner passing over the plates of her torso. He saw how her chest rose shallow, each breath tight, controlled. The undersuit stitched into her skin left faint scars like brands. He risked a glance at her face. Her amber eyes never left him, fire burning in silence. He wondered how long she had been forced to meet the eyes of torturers, and now she was watching him, testing if he was different. He moved to her back, wires and conduits tangled like roots, and there pulsed the pain compliance node, a cruel device glowing faint red. The Krell used it to keep her docile. Kael adjusted his body so the cameras could not see clearly. Under the guise of checking a conduit, he brushed the tip of his magnetized probe across the sensor. A tiny spark, and the node went dark. Her body flinched. A tremor ran through her. Then he saw her shoulders ease by the smallest fraction. Relief, so slight only someone watching closely would notice, he murmured under his breath. Too quiet for the recorders. Steady now. You're safe for a moment. Her ears twitched, catching the sound. Her eyes widened just a fraction, the fire in them shifting, no less fierce but touched now with confusion. Kael continued, his tools moving with calm efficiency, but his every motion was deliberate. Small gifts hidden inside routine work. When the proctor's comms chimed and Varen left the chamber, Kael finally allowed his breath to ease. They were alone. He walked to the nutrient dispenser and filled a feeding tube, returning to her slowly. His steps cautious, he held it out without speaking, offering, not commanding. She stared at it, then at him. The silence stretched long and sharp, his arm steady, waiting. Finally, she leaned forward, her hands bound, and took the tube with her teeth, her eyes never leaving his. It was not submission, it was a test. And when she swallowed the first drop, Kael knew the test was his to pass. For the first time he felt it, a fragile thread forming between them, invisible but unbreakable, forged not by orders or fear but by the simple act of respect. Kael's workshop was a cluttered sanctuary of wires, screens, and half-finished tools. Nothing like the cold perfection of the Krell corridors. Here the air smelled faintly of solder and grease, human smells that made him feel less like a number. He slumped into his chair, pulled off his gloves, and let the silence press down. But the silence was never complete. Ashen's calm, synthetic voice came from the console. Your vitals are elevated, Kael. Would you like me to adjust the room's temperature? Kael gave a dry laugh. No, Ashen, I need information, not comfort. He uploaded the data from Seris's diagnostic sweep. I want everything cross-referenced with Krell augmentation logs, restricted or not. Find me what they did to her. Accessing forbidden files carries a 97% chance of detection, Ashen warned. Tone perfectly flat. Kael leaned forward, jaw tight. Then cloak yourself in the grid. Ride their own diagnostic cycles, make them blind. We don't have time to play safe. Ashen obeyed. Code streamed across the main screen. Walls of encryption falling like glass under a diamond blade. Schematics appeared. Formulas. Cold medical. Reports that described not a person but an experiment. Kael's stomach twisted as he read about hormone governors suppressing her emotions. Neural dampeners flooding her mind with silence. A pain compliance network built into her very spine. Each line described cruelty not as accident, but design. The Krell had hollowed her out, keeping only the parts they considered useful. Kael clenched, his fists, anger hot in his chest. He thought of Seris's amber eyes, alive and defiant even when chained. She wasn't hollow. She wasn't gone. She was still there, fighting. He could feel it. He whispered to himself. They broke her body, but not her spirit. Not yet. Ashen's voice interrupted. I detect inconsistencies in the control hierarchy. There are secondary access points buried beneath redundant logs, exploitable. Kael's heart jumped. A back door, yes. That's our way in. We'll plant a hidden key. Something only I can use. He sketched out the plan on his datapad, his hands steady despite the rage burning inside. If he could slip a command string into her gauntlet systems, it could bypass the Proctor's authority. A ghost key hidden in plain sight. He sat back, running, a hand over his face. This wasn't just another job. It was no longer about credits or contracts. This was about her, about giving her a chance to live. She deserved more than to be bled dry for data. Kael thought of his father, a soldier who taught him to build instead of break. Those lessons echoed now. Seris was not a weapon to polish, she was a machine to fix. No, not a machine, a person. He stared at the map of the station glowing on his display. Every corridor, every patrol route, every blind spot. Ashen highlighted possible escape paths. You are planning extraction, it said. Kael shook his head, a grim smile touching his lips. No, Ashen. I'm planning a theft. They built a cage, and I'm going to steal the soul they tried to lock inside. The chamber lights glowed a cold blue. As Kael stood before Seris again, tools in hand, voice steady for the recorders, recalibrating articulation servos in the left gauntlet, he said, his tone as flat as the metal wall behind her. The Proctor listened from the observation deck, his eyes unblinking as always. Kael's hands moved with deliberate calm, but every motion carried something hidden. The thin scanner probe. In his grip was not just checking servos, it was carrying the code he and Ashen had written. A ghost key. A silent worm that would live inside redundant logs invisible to Krell eyes. He leaned close, blocking the cameras with his body. His lips barely moved, steady now. Just 1 second, he brushed the probe against a contact node, executed the command. His datapad flashed a tiny glyph, almost too small to see. And then it happened. The magnetic locks on her wrists and ankles clicked and disengaged. The sound like thunder in the silence. For the first time since he had met her, she was free. The moment stretched. Her body stiffened. Her fingers flexed like a predator testing the air. She could have crushed his throat in an instant. She could have torn the cables from the wall and filled the room with chaos. But she didn't move. Her amber eyes widened, burning brighter than before. Not with rage, but with raw disbelief. She stared at her freed hands, then at him. He gave the smallest nod, a signal that said this was no accident. This was a gift. Seconds passed like hours. Then he reactivated the restraints. The locks clamped back with a sharp hiss. Her body trembled once, not from fear but from the weight of a choice. She looked at him, her ears tilted forward, every filament glowing a shade brighter, a silent question hanging between them. Do you mean this? Can I trust you? Kael's heart thundered, but his face remained calm for the cameras. He packed his tools, made a note on his wrist display. System. Lag reduced by 2.3 milliseconds, report complete. When Varen was called away by an urgent comm signal, Kael dared to lift his eyes to her again. They were alone for a breath of time. He lowered his voice, barely audible. What's your name? Her lips parted. The sound was rough, raw, like stone grinding on stone, but it was there. A single word. She forced past years of silence, Seris. The name filled the chamber like a spark in darkness. Kael froze, stunned, then gave a small nod. Holding her gaze, Seris, he repeated softly. Not as a label, not as property, but as a truth. She blinked, her expression unreadable. But the fire in her eyes shifted, burning not only with defiance, but with something new, something dangerous, for the Krell hope. Kael clipped his kit shut, straightened and walked toward the door. But her voice, still cracked and fragile, reached him once more. Not a question, Not a plea, but a promise spoken like steel. Next time, do not put the chains back. Kael sat hunched over his console, the glow of shifting schematics casting hard shadows across his face. Ashen's calm voice filled the room. Kael, there is an encrypted cluster buried beneath military archives. The protective layers are unusually aggressive. Kael rubbed his eyes. Voice hard. Break it. Ashen hesitated. Detection risk, 99%. Kael slammed a fist against the desk, then break it faster. The code war began, walls of data colliding, alarms whispering at the edges of firewalls. Kael's heart hammered until at last the files bled open, and what spilled onto his screen made his blood run cold. The schematic showed a cruel device fused into Seris's spine, a small black thorn, embedded in her nerves labeled only as Sovereignty Spur. Its function scrolled in stark lines. 1. To flood her nervous system with unbearable pain at a single command. 2. Far worse. To deliver a necrotizing agent slowly into her body, destroying her cell by cell, feeding data into Krell records while her life burned away. Kael read the projected lifespan. Less than 1 year. His hand shook, the truth crushing him. She was never meant to survive. She was never meant to escape. She was a disposable prototype. Her death was the experiment. Kael stood, pacing the workshop, anger blazing through him hotter than anything he had felt before. They weren't keeping her alive. They were killing her slowly, making her suffering the entire point. His throat tightened as he whispered, "Not while I breathe." Ashen's voice was steady. "Kael, attempting removal carries catastrophic risk. Severing the wrong node may paralyze or kill her." Kael stopped, eyes burning. "Then I'll learn every wire, every connection. I'll know it better than they do, and I'll cut it out." The next session he disabled the recorders with his ghost key, a risk that could cost him everything. Kneeling before her, he pulled up the stolen files, the diagrams, the words that reduced her to a project number. Her eyes narrowed as she read. Amber fire flaring brighter, she understood. She was dying by design. Kael's voice was low but fierce. "They put poison in you, Seris. They wanted you to break, but I can stop it. I can remove this. It will be dangerous. You'll have to trust me completely, can you?" For a long moment she was still, then she met his gaze, unflinching. Her ears tilted forward. Her head gave a single sharp nod. One answer. One choice. Kael swallowed hard, his hands brushing the cold armor at her back. "Then we start now." The procedure was brutal in its intimacy. He unbolted the heavy plate from her spine, exposing pale, scarred skin, and there it was, the wicked spur pulsing faintly against her vertebrae. He forced his hand steady, his tools delicate in the scant millimeters of flesh, her breathing slow and controlled against his knuckles. One slip could end her. His whisper was steady. "Hold still. I'm almost there." And then, with a final cut, the device flickered. Its red glow died. The poison flow stopped. Kael exhaled, a breath he didn't know he was holding. His eyes lifted to hers. A single tear slid down her cheek. She hadn't cried before, not for pain, not for chains, but for this, freedom creeping back into her blood. Kael reached out without thinking, and brushed it away, his thumb gentle on her skin. For the first time he wasn't her mechanic, he was her choice, her ally, maybe more. And in that silent chamber, trust was forged into something unbreakable. The change in Seris was not dramatic at first, but Kael noticed it in every detail. The faint glow in the tufts of her ears no longer flickered erratically, but pulsed with a steady rhythm. Her movements, which had always been stiff and guarded, grew more fluid, like chains were loosening one by one. She still bore scars, still carried the weight of metal grafted into her flesh, but for the first time since he had seen her, she looked less like a weapon, and more like a woman fighting her way back to life. Kael logged the usual numbers for the Krell files, reporting stability. But behind the mask of duty he watched her eyes, no longer clouded with exhaustion, now sharp, alive, calculating. He removed the remaining function of the spur during their next session, cutting off the pain cascade for good. When the final circuit blinked out and the device went cold, she let out a long, quiet breath, almost like a sigh. Kael froze, realizing it wasn't relief alone. It was something deeper. The sound of a body no longer enslaved to torment, he felt. A rush of fierce pride stronger than victory. This was defiance carved into survival, and he had helped her win. But their triumph did not go unnoticed. On the command deck, Director Varen leaned over the biomonitors, his black eyes narrowing. The degradation had halted. The readings were anomalous, hormone levels showing something that the database dared to call contentment. It was an unacceptable variable. Machines did not feel content, Varen whispered to his comms. Post a guard outside Asset 7 at all times. The human is not to be left alone with her. Restrict his access immediately. When Kael arrived the next day, a Krell guard stood at the cell's entrance, weapon ready, his presence heavy. Kael kept his face calm, his movements clinical as he worked on Seris's leg brace, but inside he was calculating faster than ever. The window for escape was closing. He could feel it in the way Varen's shadow stretched over every corner. Seris felt it too. Her eyes followed the guard with cold, predatory stillness. Her body coiled even while chained. As Kael finished the session and turned to pack his tools, she moved with startling swiftness. Her hand brushed against his wrist, a fleeting touch but enough to freeze him in place. He turned. Amber fire met his gaze. Her lips parted, and for the second time she spoke. Her voice still rough but sharper. Now stronger, Viella, she whispered. Reclaiming the name the Krell had buried. Reclaiming herself. Kael's chest tightened. He gave the smallest nod. Seris, he repeated softly, and her ears flicked forward at the sound. The guard's eyes remained blind to the exchange. That night, Kael sat alone in his quarters, the walls pressing closer. The emergency plan burned in his mind. The logic bomb he had buried in the station's grid waited like a sleeping giant. He whispered the words under his breath. Not yet, but soon. The cage was tightening, and when it snapped shut, he and Seris would break it together, not as mechanic and machine, not as prisoner and warden, but as two souls who had chosen to fight, side by side. Director Varen's chamber was cold even by Krell standards. No decoration, no softness, only smooth walls, and a single table that stretched like a blade between them. Kael sat on one side, his toolkit confiscated, his hands clasped loosely in his lap, his face a mask of obedience. Varen paced the length of the room, his tunic immaculate, his voice sharp. Your reports are inconsistent, human. Your notes avoid clarity. Your diagnostic times are longer than protocol. Explain. Kael met his gaze evenly. Mechanical systems adapt differently when fused with organic tissue. Sometimes the data resists clean translation. Varen's black eyes narrowed. You stall with words. I smell deceit. The interrogation dragged. Every question another needle probing for weakness. Kael answered each with the flat tone of a contractor who cared for nothing but his pay. But inside his mind raced. Ashen's warnings whispered through his memory. Probability of suspicion rising, probability of termination high. Kael knew the truth. Varen was close, too close. And soon the fragile line he walked would snap. When the Krell dismissed him at last, the message was clear. Your access will be restricted. Your time with Asset 7 supervised. Back in the containment cell, a guard loomed always at his side, silent, armed. Kael adjusted Seris's brace with the soldier's eyes burning holes into his back. Every touch, every whisper he might have given her now stolen, yet even under that watch her gaze found him, her ears tilted toward his low breathing. A silent understanding passed between them. Their time was gone. The quiet rebellion was over. What came next would be fire. That night in his quarters, Kael stared at the ceiling, his pulse pounding. His father's words haunted him. "You're not a soldier. You're a builder." But builders could only watch so long while cruelty reigned. He reached under the bunk and pulled free his datapad, the transmitter hidden inside. The command sequence Ashen had written glowed faint on the screen. 3 words. 3 words that would tear open the cage. He closed his eyes, saw Seris's face, the amber fire of her eyes, the single tear that had traced her cheek when he removed the spur. Her voice rough but proud when she gave her name back to herself. His jaw set. His thumb hovered over the sequence. He whispered, "It's time," and pressed send. Deep inside the station's power grid, the code stirred. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a low vibration rolled through the walls. Alarms blared, red lights flared. The automated voice of the Crucible shrieked, "Warning, unstable surge. Detected, initiating diagnostic cascade. All non-essential systems offline." Kael stood. The door lock to his quarters sputtered and died. He slammed his shoulder against it. The panel gave way. Outside the corridor was chaos. Krell personnel moved. In sharp formation, none sparing him a glance. He grabbed a heavy wrench from a fallen toolbox, his weapon of necessity. His path was set. The cage was breaking, and he would reach her before it slammed shut again. The Crucible shuddered, as though a giant had gripped its spine. Red lights, strobing across steel corridors while the shriek of klaxons echoed through every deck. Kael ran hard, wrench clutched in his grip, moving with the flow of panicked personnel. His steps sure, his eyes locked on the path Ashen had mapped weeks ago. Service shafts and blind spots no Krell ever noticed. The power grid sputtered, systems dropping one by one, and when he reached the containment wing, the guard outside Seris's cell was shouting into his comm, his back exposed. Kael did not hesitate. The wrench cracked across the alien's neck with brutal finality. The Krell crumpled. Kael ripped the panel from the door, sparks showering as he severed the clamp. The heavy door hissed open. And there she stood. Seris no longer bound to the wall. The emergency release had disengaged her restraints. Her body coiled like a spring, amber eyes burning in the red gloom. The sight stole Kael's breath. She wasn't broken. She wasn't helpless. She was ready. "It's time," he said, chest heaving. Her lips curled in the sharpest smile he had ever seen. "Then we run," she answered, her voice raw but steady. They plunged into the station's guts, narrow maintenance passages vibrating with the hum of emergency systems. Kael leading with his datapad glowing faintly, Seris close behind, moving with predator's grace, her steps silent despite the heavy armor. Patrols thundered past at intersections, beams of searchlights slicing through the haze. Once Kael yanked her into a recessed alcove, her breath hot on his neck, her body heat radiating like fire. They waited, the squad's boots pounding past. Then she slipped free like shadow, and they moved again. The first firefight came in a cargo hold vast as a cathedral. Krell soldiers sweeping in formation, their weapons scanning. Kael froze, exposed, but Seris didn't. She surged forward in a blur of blue hair and yellow plates, her gauntlets whined to life, plasma casters sparking. Kael's breath caught. She didn't fire at the soldiers. She fired above, at ceiling supports. The blast tore through steel, sending girders and debris crashing down in a wall of fire and smoke. The Krell scattered, shouting. Kael dashed through the chaos as Seris covered him, her movements not those of a machine, but of a warrior claiming her fight. They raced on, scrambling, Ladders crawling through shafts. Kael's arms burning. Seris pulling him up once when his grip slipped. Her strength effortless. Their escape was no longer one-sided. She was saving him as much as he her. The alarms roared louder. The Crucible groaned. But every step took them closer to Base 7. Every turn burned into Kael's memory. Their breaths sinking, their bodies moving in rhythm, human and augmented mind and blade. At the final stretch, the corridors widened. The docking sector ahead. But shouts rose behind them. The pounding of armored boots, a squad closing fast. Kael's heart thundered. Seris turned, her amber eyes fierce, and for the first time he saw it fully. Not the prisoner, not the asset, but the weapon they had tried to forge into obedience, now unleashed on her own terms. Her gauntlets glowed white-hot. "Go," she hissed. "I'll clear the way." And Kael realized in that breath that she wasn't just following him to freedom. She was fighting for it. The docking sector loomed ahead, its wide gates flanked by warning strobes, the air thick with the smell of burning circuits from the blackout. Kael's lungs burned as he sprinted. Seris beside him, her gauntlets glowing faintly from the last burst of fire she had unleashed. Their escape route had been clean for minutes, but now the echo of boots thundered behind, shouts of Krell officers, cutting through the klaxons. "Bay 7, cut them off," Kael hissed, pulling Seris into a side corridor that branched away from the main artery. His datapad blinking weakly, its charge nearly spent, the map pulsing with the one last path to the Stargazer. They turned a corner and froze. A lone Krell stood at the intersection, rifle raised, visor catching the red light. Kael's breath caught. It was the junior guard. The one who had stood silent outside Seris's cell for weeks. His hands shook slightly as his weapon leveled at them. Behind him, the comm on his shoulder crackled. "Targets near cargo wing. Intercept now." Kael braced, shifting the wrench. In his hand, Seris's body tensed, ears flat, every muscle ready to strike. But the guard's dark eyes flicked from Kael's face to Seris's burning amber gaze. He had seen them before, seen the way the human touched her with care, seen the fire return to her eyes, seconds stretched, a knife edge between violence and choice. Then the guard lowered his rifle, pointing instead down the opposite hall. "Base 7 is that way," he said, his voice low, almost strained. "The others are moving to Cargo 3, I will tell them. You went there, go." Kael stared, stunned. "Why?" But Seris grabbed his wrist and pulled. No time for questions, only survival. The guard stood motionless as they fled, his silhouette swallowed by the strobing red. The final hatch groaned open and the Stargazer lay before them, Kael's patched freighter, small and battered but alive, its gray hull a promise of freedom. They sprinted across the deck, Seris's cloak flaring behind her. Plasma bolts hissed from a pursuing squad, striking sparks off the hangar walls. Kael ducked into the ramp, Seris covering his back with sharp, precise fire. She wasn't aiming to kill. She aimed to slow, to scatter, to win time. The ramp sealed as Kael slammed the controls. "Strap in," he barked, his hands flying over the cockpit panels, the hum of the ship rising like a heartbeat. Through the viewport, Krell interceptors detached from the Crucible, sleek black craft curving into pursuit. Kael's jaw set, fingers dancing across the controls. "Hold together, girl. Hold together," he whispered to the Stargazer. The freighter shuddered as its engine screamed to life. Seris appeared beside him, bracing her hands on the chair, her voice fierce. "They won't take us." Kael's lips tightened into a grim smile. "Not today." He wove the ship through docking arms, twisting metal corridors, debris fields left by the blackout, interceptors fired, streaks of plasma, scorching past. Seris's gauntlet snapped open. Plasma burst spitting from the rear cannon ports he had tied to her systems. Her fire drove back the closest pursuers. The Crucible shrank behind them, still bleeding sparks and fire into the void. Kael's hand slammed the throttle, the stars stretched, light bending, and with a gut-deep roar the stargazer leapt to faster than light, the chaos of pursuit dissolving into the serene hum of hyperspace. Silence flooded the cockpit. Kael leaned back, sweat slick on his skin, his hands trembling as they left the controls. Seris stood by the viewport, amber eyes glowing softly as hyperspace light reflected across her face. For the first time her shoulders dropped, the coil of constant tension unwinding. Kael looked at her, voice hoarse but steady. "We did it." And her lips curved not into a predator's snarl but into the faintest smile, a fragile victory born in fire. The stargazer drifted in silence, hyperspace a soft hum through its hull. Kael sat in the medbay with his tools spread neatly on a tray, his hands steady though his chest still carried the weight of their flight. Seris sat on the diagnostic bed, her cloak folded aside, the pale glow of the overhead light painting her face in soft silver. There were no shackles now, no proctor, no guard watching with dead eyes. Just the two of them and the steady rhythm of the ship. Kael reached for the last plate of Krell armor, the dark piece bolted to her torso. He met her gaze once, waiting. She gave the faintest nod and he began. The locks released one by one, each click echoing like the fall of chains. His fingers brushed warm fabric of the biosuit beneath. Scars traced her skin where the plates had once dug deep. He moved carefully, reverent until the final piece clattered onto the tray. Heavy and useless, Seris straightened, her body free of the alien shell for the first time in years. She flexed her arms, her chest rising deep, steady breaths. Kael swallowed, unable to hide the way his eyes lingered, not on the scars as shame, but as proof she had endured, proof she had won. He lifted his hand slowly, his thumb brushing over the faint scar left near her temple where he had cut away the control implant. She did not flinch, did not pull back. Instead, she leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. Amber light softened not by fury but by something warmer, deeper. When her gaze opened again, it locked with his, and in the hush of the medbay, Kael felt every barrier between them fall. Days passed, the frantic edge of escape fading, replaced by quiet routines. Seris explored the ship as if memorizing its heartbeat, her steps silent in the corridors, her voice slowly smoothing each time she spoke. Kael found her one morning, in the hydroponics bay, standing barefoot in the soil, her ears twitching as she listened to the hum of water pumps, her hands brushing over broad green leaves with awe. She whispered one word, soft but steady. Alive. And Kael's chest tightened, realizing this was the first time she had ever touched something that grew. When supplies ran low, they descended onto a hidden world, a jewel of green forests and wide oceans untouched by any map. They landed in a meadow where sunlight spilled across wild grass. Seris stepped out of the shuttle barefoot, tilting her face to the warmth, her hair shimmering like a river of blue fire. Kael watched as she pressed her palm against the bark of an ancient tree, her amber eyes reflecting the sky, her expression shifting from wariness to wonder. That night in the cockpit, the two of them sat side by side, the stars spread endless beyond the viewport. She traced the pattern of a nebula with her fingertip against the glass, then turned to him, her eyes glowing with a quiet flame. "On the Crucible you risked everything," she said, her voice no longer rough but sure. "Why?" Kael's throat tightened, he held her gaze. "Because when I looked at you, I didn't see a weapon. I saw someone who deserved to be free." Silence stretched. Then she leaned forward, her lips brushing his in a hesitant question. His hand rose to cradle the back of her neck, answering without words. The kiss deepened. A release of every fear, every battle, every promise they had forged in the dark. When they parted, she smiled. A true, unguarded smile that lit her face like a sunrise. She rested her head against his shoulder, his arm around her. Together they looked out at the infinite stars, no longer prisoner and mechanic, no longer asset and contractor, but two souls bound by fire and choice, building a new life beneath skies no Krell had ever touched. And in that quiet hum of the stargazer, surrounded by the endless unknown, they had finally found home. If you believe humanity always finds the way, subscribe for more HFY Sci-Fi audiobooks.